Hello, and welcome to Secure Talk, a podcast where we explore the critical world of information security innovation and compliance. I'm your host, Justin Beals, founder and CEO of StrikeGraph. Together with our expert guests, we'll provide you tools and tips to help your business thrive in the rapidly evolving cybersecurity environment. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Secure Talk. I'm your host, Justin Beals. On November 10th, 2025, everything changes for defense contractors. That's the day the Department of Defense's CMMC requirements become mandatory in all contract solicitations. After years of delays, pilot programs, and self-certification loopholes, compliance is no longer optional. You either meet the requirements or you don't get the contract. And if you're wondering what the pain point looks like, enforcement is already here. In May of 2025, Raytheon and RTX Corporation agreed to pay $8.4 million to settle allegations that they violated the False Claims Act by failing to comply with cybersecurity requirements in Department of Defense contracts. The issue wasn't sophisticated nation-state hackers or zero-day exploits. Raytheon failed to implement basic security controls. They didn't develop a system security plan. They didn't install antivirus software on systems handling defense information. This wasn't an isolated incident. In October of 2024, Pennsylvania State University paid $1.25 million to resolve similar allegations across 15 different DoD and NASA contracts. And in September of 2025, the Georgia Institute of Technology settled for $875,000 to resolve False Claims Act allegations where the Department of Justice had intervened for the first time in a cybersecurity case. Katie Arrington, who is performing the duties of the DoD Chief Information Officer and the architect of the CMMC program, has been blunt about what's coming. At an AFCA luncheon, she warned contractors, if you go on LinkedIn one more time and tell me how hard CMMC is, I'm going to beat you. That ship sailed in 2014. And she's right. Contractors have been required to comply with NIST Standard 800-171 since 2017. For over a decade, they've been self-certifying their compliance, but complaining publicly about how difficult cybersecurity requirements are sends a dangerous message. It tells the government you're not compliant, and it tells adversaries exactly where to look for vulnerabilities. As Arrington put it, do you think the government isn't watching? The stakes are enormous. On September 10th, 2025, the Department of Defense published the final DFARS rule implementing CMMC, setting the stage for mandatory compliance. After years of debate, the program is now federal law. If you're a defense contractor, November 10th marks a fundamental shift. Every new solicitation after that date will include CMMC requirements. Your ability to even bid on contracts now depends on demonstrating measurable cybersecurity practices. The grace period is over. The self-attestation loophole has closed. What makes CMMC different from previous compliance efforts is its quantitative approach. You're not just checking boxes, you're receiving scores. An 88 out of 110 is required for level 2 conditional status. And these aren't arbitrary. They represent measurable capabilities across domains like incident response, access control, and continuous monitoring. Now, for level 1 contractors handling federal contract information, you'll need annual self-assessments reported through the Supplier Performance Risk System. For level 2 contractors handling controlled unclassified information, you'll need independent validation by certified third-party assessors. And for level 3 contractors working with breakthrough technology or creating critical aggregations of CUI, you'll face direct government audits. The Department of Defense estimates that 35% of their contractors will need a level 2 certification through third-party assessors. That's thousands of organizations competing for limited assessment capacity. The bottleneck is real. Wait too long and you find yourself unable to schedule an assessment when your contract renewal depends on it. Prime contractors now bear responsibility for verifying subcontractor compliance before award. They can't just accept a security questionnaire anymore. They need evidence, and that needs validation. And they're personally attesting to the government that they're actively managing their supply chain. The concept of an affirming official puts accountability on a senior executive. We've seen this pattern before in the commercial sector. CISOs are becoming personally liable for major security failures. And now we're seeing it extend in the defense industrial base. Sign your name to a CMMC attestation, and you're taking responsibility for the accuracy of that claim. Now, what fascinates me about this transformation is how it mirrors challenges I've faced throughout my career in building technology products. When you're designing secure systems, you can't start with compliance requirements. You start with understanding your actual risk posture, your operational realities, your resource constraints. Then you build security that works for your specific context. The compliance frameworks are measurement tools. CMMC is not a design specification for security. And CMMC, of course, forces this methodology. You can't just implement a checklist and hope for the best. You need to understand which information systems handle federal CUI or FCI, how data flows through your organization, where your vulnerabilities actually exist. Then you need to demonstrate continuous monitoring and active risk engagement over time. The answer for both types of businesses lies in leveraging technology. You need to find methods of automating compliance evidence collection, streamlining assessment preparation, and monitoring the scope of security practices without requiring a dramatic increase in dedicated security staff. There are a lot of vendors selling CMMC solutions in the market right now. It's scary when you're facing a six-figure readiness assessment. I don't believe in that model. And of course, at StrikeGraph, we're offering a free level 2 self-assessment, including critical elements like system security plan, SPRS score, and a plan of action and milestones reports at no cost. We believe we need to support organizations in becoming compliant, not gatekeep access to government contracts. We've caught some criticisms for this offer at the National Cyber Summit. Competitors suggested we were undercutting the market. But our community needs accessible solutions right now. These aren't faceless corporations with unlimited budgets. These are veteran-owned companies, specialized manufacturers, and critical suppliers who want to support national defense, but shouldn't have to spend an exorbitant amount of money just to understand their security baseline. Today's conversation brings someone uniquely qualified to discuss the challenges. Our guest spent 15 years in senior federal government roles, including founding the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's National Risk Management Center. He's worked at the highest levels of policy development around supply chain security and critical infrastructure protection. And now, as Senior Vice President for Critical Infrastructure at Exeger, he helps defense contractors navigate exactly these CMMC requirements. We'll explore together the practical implications of the DFARS ruling, what prime contractors now expect from their subs, where the assessment bottlenecks will hit the hardest, and how businesses can compete in this new environment. We'll also discuss why this represents more than just a compliance exercise. It is a fundamental shift in how the defense industrial base thinks about security as a shared responsibility across the entire supply chain. The mathematics are straightforward. If you want to participate in defense contracting, you need to meet CMMC requirements. The timeline is aggressive, the expectations are clear, and the consequences of waiting too long, including losing the business you've spent years building, are severe. But there's also opportunity here. Organizations that invest in security infrastructure now, that build cultures of continuous risk management, that leverage technology to automate compliance, those companies will have a competitive advantage. They'll be the subcontractors primes want to work with. They'll win contracts competitors can't bid on, and they'll build customer trust that extends far beyond government work. Bob Kolasky, our guest today, is Senior Vice President for Critical Infrastructure at Exeger, where he focuses on developing cutting-edge risk management solutions for critical infrastructure companies and supporting government agencies. In this role, Mr. Kolasky leads market strategy for addressing third-party and supply chain risk in critical infrastructure and delivering analysis. Bob also serves as the non-resident scholar in technology and international affairs program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, as a senior associate for the Center on Strategic and International Studies, and a senior fellow at Auburn University's McCrary Institute. He is the former chair of the High-Level Risk Forum for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Mr. Kolasky joined Exeger after 15 years as a senior leader in the federal government, where he was responsible for foundational work in national security risk management and election security. He was the founding director for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's National Risk Management Center at the Department of Homeland Security. As one of CISA's assistant directors, he oversaw efforts to build a strategic, cross-sector government and industry risk management approach to cyber and supply chain threats to critical infrastructure. Mr. Kolasky has served in a number of other senior leadership roles for DHS, including acting assistant secretary and principal deputy assistant secretary for infrastructure protection. Earlier in his career, Bob was a management consultant, a journalist, and an entrepreneur. He graduated from Dartmouth College and from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Please join me in welcoming Bob back to Secure Talk.
Bob, I'm really grateful to have you back on Secure Talk this week. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be back, Justin. Let's enjoy the conversations.
I feel like this is the second time we've done a recording and a couple times we've had to chat. I'm proud of our friendship, my friend. It's growing professionally.
Me too, yes. And we have lots of aligned interests.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, like something you and I have been talking about as long as a year ago was what's happening with CMMC, what's changing about, nation state supply chain management for our federal government. And we have a final ruling, a DFARS ruling that is going into effect on November 10th. And it's given us a lot of clarity, right, Bob? Maybe we'll just start off. I'm going to start off with a really easy question. Like, let's capture what the DFARS ruling means in the sausage making process a little bit.
Yeah. So, I like to think of it, first of all, it's the permission to put the requirements into the contracts, which is what's always been coming, and sort of to define the levels of expectations for CMMC certification based on the handling of CUI controlled unclassified information there. And so it starts the framework by which there are going to be real requirements, and you are going to be required to be certified at a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3 based on the DoD's expectation of what CUI is going to be handled as part of that. And so, I think that's the significant point, that when you are responding, when you're a part of a team responding, when you are serving part of the defense industrial base in responding to these things, you know where the requirements are. And so, we've talked before about sort of people like are going to get religion finally, but you better have your religion now, right? And so right. This is the moment you're talking to God.
Yeah. And I think, it's been like we were going to do it, and then COVID hit, and then of course, elections change things. We're interested in what the new administration is going to do, and of course, they leaned in really hard. And so one of the big findings was that the DoD made a level 1 a pass-fail requirement, no more grace period. It is done, right? Like, you're not going to get the contract if you don't meet the CMMC requirements specified in the contract. Yeah.
But there's still the degree in level 1 that it is a self-attestation that you're doing that. And so there's still going to be implementation ambiguity of how things like that are checked along the way. Of course, as you get higher up the chain, the actual requirements for certification, and, you go to level 3, and DoD is actually looking to confirm you've done it. Level 2, and you obviously are talking to customers about this. So are we. Level 2, Are you going to make sure you have the independent attestation by a C3PAO, those sorts of things. But yeah, there's a lot more definition out there.
The one of the things that I find, there are some innovations in CMMC, right? Like you and I are well aware of other styles of frameworks like an ISO 27001 or a SOC 2 type thing. One of the things that I always find interesting about just CMMC broadly, level 1, through level 3 is quantitative. So we're scoring. You're not going to have a perfect score all the time. Yeah. And also
risk management.
Still risk management, plan of action and milestones, where you're like, okay, and also I got to show progress over time. So yeah, I find those almost like the government as a buyer being aware of where the vendors will be at. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you see a theme. We're talking about CMMC, but we could be talking about FedRAMP certification. We could be talking about other aspects of the DoD's software risk management process. You see a thing where nobody wants just a moment of time, either a binary yes or no, but a commitment to continue to actively manage risk and be flexible around that. And so, the easy mantra is to get rid of checklists and replace checklists with sort of a dynamic process that can be automated and regularly checked against that. And I think the policy and regulatory framework is trying to replicate that, make that mantra a reality.
Yeah. And in the DFARS ruling, it redefines current CMMC status to mean no changes in compliance. And I think to your point, right? Like continuous, active security infrastructure in place around the CUI requirements. This is not a one and done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how that's validated over time, how that's checked and at what level, that's all going to be, there's going to be experience around that. But I very much hope, and I know you do too, that, this gets entities to take their risks more seriously, forces them to from a business interest, and then changes their culture because it has changed the sort of cost benefit analysis of making an investment in cyber protections.
Yeah, certainly. I made a change to my sales deck in the last quarter a little bit where I'm trying to explain to people interested in hitting any supply chain outcome, compliance outcome, that this is like a change in your operations plus a change in your security that equals compliance. Like you're not just doing a quick test and being done. Like you're going to change how you work or identify how you're working today and keep that going.
Yeah.
Which you should have been doing all along, honestly. But now we're going to measure it. Yeah.
Yeah. And technology is going to enable you to more continuously be looking at whether the risk has changed and how you're addressing risk and things like that.
Yeah. When I first started working in this space about 6 years ago, one of the things that really floored me, and of course I knew this as a CTO, was just really like the network effect of supply chain and third-party risk and how things flow down. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that in the rule, prime contractors are responsible for verifying subcontractor CMMC compliance before award. Mm-hmm. And they cannot view the subcontractor certificates in the SPRS systems. So they've got to rely on either an audit or the subcontractor meeting an assessment or providing some validation and verification.
Yeah, I think it'll change the nature of the business relationship between a prime and a sub. Obviously, subs will want to be figuring out ways to demonstrate when they're going after being a subcontractor for a prime contractor, to demonstrate ahead of the game that they're already there. So it is a business differentiator to say, hey, we've achieved this level of CMMC certification for another purpose, or we've made this investment in these sort of things, or these are our certifications around that. And you're going to want to lead with that when you're setting up the relationship with the prime contractors, and you're going to get those questions even before it becomes a contracting discussion, right? And, at the same time, the primes and, the trend of the primes actually making investments in subcontracts ability to go through the CMMC process and demonstrate CMMC compliance if they think a sub adds real value to their offering, and that's what we're certainly, I think DoD is certainly hoping that there's just going to be more pressure, business pressure across the way to make investments in this area as a competitive advantage, as a just a necessity to have the ability to win there, and that primes will take some ownership over their supply base, their supply chain.
I have some customers that are primes, and what I find interesting that they've started discussing with us is how to, like, this concept of validation, right? Like, it's one thing for my sub to tell me, hey, this is my score, but now I feel kind of responsible, maybe from a legal perspective or a commercial contract perspective, that I've validated that operation as well. And that's changed the tech discussion.
Yeah. And, Exeger, and we've worked together, and Exeger is a supply chain risk management company in the first place. And so Exeger, we spend our time trying to help prime contractors. We do business with 3 of the 5 biggest prime contractors in the defense industrial base. We do business with a lot of other big companies who care about their suppliers. There's always been an aspect that you've owned your supplier's risk a little bit. And by entering into the nature of a business relationship where you're working together to deliver something that's functionally or operationally important to the warfighting mission or some other sort of critical system, that risk is part of your responsibility. And especially if you give access to data and stuff. Now you can't, right? Now officially you own that risk, right? But you already own that risk a little bit. But for purposes of CMMC, you are attesting to the government that you're actively managing that risk.
And I think it's like that representation. And I think we'll dig into this for a second, but the chief compliance officers that I've talked to now are really scared that a security questionnaire is just not going to do it. Right. Like it wasn't the level of rigor to validate, to properly validate that the sub was effective.
And they shouldn't necessarily be scared. They should just accept that is the reality and build in a process. Right. But again, from a risk perspective, it was never, it has not been good enough for a long time. So let's trust, but verify. Let's look for different processes to verify. And, I always use the old so trust but verify is the Reaganism. There's a lot of times you want to verify and then trust, right? And I think that's where we're getting to. You don't trust it, and that goes to the zero trust mindset. Yeah.
They have this concept in the DFARS ruling of an affirming official. And that is, I think you're putting the load on a person, a senior executive.
Yeah.
And I do think that always changes the game as well. We've seen this in the commercial space where CISOs have become personally liable for failures to secure. And now we've got, I think, senior officials in the DIB. Yeah.
Yeah. And I taking that line of question down that line for a second, I'm not sure, like, the personal liability for CISOs is something that scares me a little bit. Like, there's a level degree if you are, as a CISO, if you are within your resources taking the steps you can to try to take the steps to tend to achieve security, you shouldn't necessarily be liable if the Chinese government decides to attack you or the Russian government decides to attack you. So it's figuring the gap of when you are actually, you're not meeting a realistic standard of care. And I think the courts, right, in the private sector on the CISA side, the SolarWinds case and other things like that, the courts are still going to working through kind of what is your duty of care, standard of care, and things like that. But to your overall point on attestation, I'm putting my pen on something. I want to make sure I'm asking the hard questions of my team, and I know that my reputation, if not my legal, if I'm not legally liable, I'm certainly reputationally liable for not doing it. And that process is still playing out, but I think attestation is a good step. We've seen the same thing with software development practices and what CISA has been trying to do in terms of software attestation, the secure software development lifecycle processes. an attestation. So we're definitely seeing a trend in that direction.
Yeah, I always like to admit I'm no lawyer, although I did play one in a high school play once.
Okay.
So
To Kill a Mockingbird or something else.
So yeah. But I do think about this concept of negligence versus being a victim of fraud yourself as a CISO, right? Like if you were negligent in your job and ethical responsibilities, or you falsified or created false claims, that's a real issue as a CISO. But if you were the victim of fraud and you weren't negligent in your work, I feel like that's not something you should be liable for necessarily.
Right. And we obviously there's some level where every CISO is accepting some level of risk because you have to operationally do the work of whatever company you're doing. And so, are you going into as a CISO, understanding what risk you're accepting? Do you have the ability to have the conversation with your C-suite and your board about this is the resources I need to get to that level of to match our risk tolerance? And again, I just get a little scared somewhere in that system that the CISO is the liable person when it is the entity that's ultimately, it's the board, it's the C-suite that are setting the resource levels and the risk tolerance level. So
yeah,
I think you have to prove negligence.
Mm-hmm. Although there's been some teeth, right? Like DOJ settled $8.4 million settlement with Raytheon recently. And as I think Katie yourself in one of the CMMC conferences that I was very aggressive about they're going to levy fines if they find that you were falsifying your claims. Yeah.
Yeah. And, And I think, but I think that goes to the point that we were just talking about, right? The fine is against the entity. The fine is not against the CISO there. And I think the entity, if the entity can be proven to not have to take the proper steps to protect valuable information, then going after them is appropriate. This is, I'm not a lawyer either, and so we'll stop this line, but it is a very interesting set of case law to continue to monitor, because the legal system does play such a key role as it has in other things like safety and health outcomes and environmental outcomes. That it does play a key role in setting kind of what expectations are for managing risk.
I think you and I, though, again, not being lawyers, and I'm sorry for continuing this, but it's a drum I like to bang. We are responsible for the ethics of how we do our jobs. Myself as a CEO, when I was a CTO, you in helping your organizations, like there should be a concept of ethics in our work and the trust we create. And I kind of get frustrated, especially as we see like some of the rise of data science, machine learning, and AI, that people have not done effective ethics in that work. I wish we would teach it better. Yeah.
My daughter is excited. She just took the LSAT. She's excited. She's 21 years old. She's excited to be a lawyer. Soon. So hopefully she'll be able to give me some legal advice along the way. She just took an ethics of an AI class, which I found fascinating. And I talked to her for ethics of AI class. I mean, my point is, in your point, right? The ethics of security and the ethics of taking care of your customers' data, your consumers' data, your business partners' data. That's what we're talking about. And so it is a business ethics question. And in some ways, as somebody who doesn't always think that the legal system is the right way to manage risk, right? In some ways, I agree with you. The culture of business ethics that isn't a culture of compliance, isn't a culture of you're just doing it because if not, you're going to be legally liable. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do for your business to be long-term successful. Certainly that's what we're trying to do at Exeter, right? Our mission is making the world a safe and transparent place to do business. And that's an ethical mission, right? We certainly sell to compliance officers and legal police, but we talk about what we do from an ethical perspective. And so I agree with you completely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the level 1, level 2, level 3 types of things that are coming out in CMMC in this DFARS ruling. So level 1, annual self-assessment reporting with an SPRS score. Level 2 and level 3 allow triennial C3PO or DBACS type assessments, depending on where you're going. But I think they're also closing the door, and especially small contractors. I'm thinking very small teams here that are working through small business administration or, have gained some federal contracts. There's a real kind of closing on the door of you need to step up. Do you agree? Is that one of the things we're seeing across that DIB base?
Yeah, I think you have to figure out a way to get some it's in level 2 as a small contractor. You have to figure out a way to get some level of independent validation, as you see in their processes, and there's an ecosystem that's out there to do it. I don't know what you're seeing. Like, you bring in the SBA, and can you use small business funds, small business loans to get to a different level of CMMC compliance? And are there different ways to offset the cost? And I think that's still a goal, that like the small businesses don't have to bear all the costs directly of CMMC compliance, and that there's some ways to get some incentives and some help along the way. And then I was talking earlier about the primes helping and the bigger players in the ecosystem. Yeah. But you got to have it as part of your business plan, how you're going to pay for this and get to that, because at some point, if you're going to stay in that business, you're going to start to lose business opportunity.
I mean, I like to say that a big part of my conceptualization of the United States as a nation state is that it's a heavy private-public partnership, right? Like our federal government relies a lot on private industry to support them. And I've seen I know that Australia's DIB is working through a similar concept to CMMC they call Essential 8, but they've started providing small business funds, right? Like, here is a small amount of funds to help you come out and hit these outcomes. I think that's helpful, right? Like, it even just greases the wheels a little bit and just takes down the fear at that small company that we're in this partnership together and we're here to support you. I would support that type of investment in security.
I certainly agree. The premise from a national defense, national security architecture, right? The government expects that industry is going to build the instruments to allow us to execute the mission of the Department of Defense, the warfighting mission there. And, the whole philosophy, and you see it, and you mentioned Katie, but when you talk to Katie Arrington and all that, right? Her whole philosophy is like, the solutions are going to come from the outside. They're going to come from the commercial space, but we need them to be ready to provide us solutions at the speed of relevance. And if they're not there from a security perspective, or if they're not there from just having the technology, the ability to scale technology, the government can help fill that gap through targeted financial incentives, through innovation funds, through security funds. I think one of the things we're going to learn in the next year is the degree to which people are able to meet the contractual requirements associated with CMMC. And if we get to a moment where there's a gap in the ability for entities to deliver the services the Department of Defense needs through the defense industrial base, got to have a hard conversation from a policy perspective of how we're going to close that gap, because we can't take the security risk, but we also can't take the operational risk of not having the technologies we need to do the warfighting mission.
Yeah, I agree. We always feel a part of this community. I'm going to do a very slight bit of self-promotion, so if anybody wants to skip ahead, it's fine with me. But we saw this with some of our mid-sized customers that were really fearful. And so what we decided to do on our platform is offer kind of a level 1 or a level 2 self-assessment for free for 60 days. So at least it's no cost up front, but you can get on a piece of technology and get to that initial SPRS score and figure out what your gap is. Of course, we eventually need to recognize revenue from it, but that's when they start doing the continuous monitoring and hopefully have understood where they're at. We caught a little flack at the National Cyber Summit from competitors, but we were like, man, our community needs solutions to help them lever into this, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. We call them freemium services a little bit, right? It's the degree to which you are, you're helping, you're triaging where the needs are through that, and you're giving that scale. And obviously you're making the business calculation that once people better understand the needs, they will be looking for solutions, which I think is important. So, we do that in some of the areas. We look at supplier risk as well.
Also, it's terrifying when you just don't know much about it. But I think once you go through that initial assessment, you're like, well, we're doing some things and these are the gaps and now I understand them. It's not as terrifying. Yeah.
Yeah. And, we haven't talked about sort of the training resources elements of CMMC, but that's obviously, the CMMC ecosystem is not just the auditors and the certifiers and the technology to support you there, but it's also the trainers. And, there's a pretty robust business market out there for people who are willing to help you along that journey.
Yeah, actually, I've had a number of colleagues that were systems administrators or software engineers that have gone and done the cyber AB training to become, I forget all the correct terms, so I apologize, but someone that can assist in assisting someone into CMMC.
The training is just to learn CMMC acronyms, and even you and I don't even know the CMMC acronyms. It's like, okay, we've invented this new language called Department of Defense Ease.
That's right. So good. So one other little bit about this is that I just find, I love thinking of myself as an engineer and computer scientist initially. And one of the things I love about CMMC is the quantitative analysis, but there's like some minimum score expectations on the level 2 side, an 88 out of 110 to even qualify for conditional status with a POAM. I think that is an innovation. Too long, it's been like so opinionated, but now we start to have scoring, right?
Yeah. In the scoring, I think a scoring like this works best as a relative assessment against, the overall ecosystem and comparable elements, whether an 88 itself is meaningful. If the difference between an 88 and a 78 and a 68 is meaningful, then you start to get a baseline of where people are. You can use the scores to benchmark, against, like companies, different size companies, and you can use the scores as a place to say, okay, good scoring systems to get a higher score incentivize good behavior, right?
Right.
And so as long as the higher scores get to things that are correlated with better security, then it's a good use of quantification.
Yeah. I used to work in the high stakes assessment education industry. And once you dig into the data science on an SAT score or something along those lines, what you realize is that these are really statistical tools. It's not actually measuring intelligence. It's plotting you on a continuum of other people's responses. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I spent a lot of years, as in Homeland Security risk analysis and risk management, and the debates we used to have as we were building some of the early risk models between qualitative and quantitative, and when it was appropriate to use qualitative and quantitative. Those were doctrinal wars in the risk analysis community, and they're doctrinal wars probably in the data science community writ large. And, I thought at times qualitative versus quantitative is a false argument. But
yeah,
I won't take us down that route because
it's fun philosophy, data science side. Yeah. Okay, let's dig into some of the assessment level clarifications that came in the DFARS ruling. So one of the things that I think we were a little surprised with is we thought there'd be a lot of level 2 self-assessment, but actually as it came out, it looks like it's a lot of level 2 C3PAO assessment, much more than we imagined. And that really the DoD estimates that only 2% of contractors can do a level 2 self-assessment, and 35% of their contractors will need a C3PAO. Mm-hmm. We know that there are issues with the number of C3POs that are available to do these types of assessments. I think we're going to experience a little bit of a bottleneck around this. Do you agree?
I mean, it comes down to, what I was saying a little bit earlier about, what kind of gaps are we going to be in the ability to meet it, right? So I don't know if you've seen numbers of how the predictions of which contracts or which requirements are going to be level 1, level 2, level 3, and what those ultimate, what the denominator of those requirements are. But if there's a lot of things, I mean, you have to take into account the throughput ability to meet the requirements. And if I agree with you that there is a bottleneck, and if the bottleneck happens in a place where there's a large denominator, then we are going to have potentially some gaps in performance.
Yeah. I thought it was
and
really.
So then you've got to speed up, trying to clear the bottleneck. And the Department of Defense is going to have to take some steps to clear that bottleneck if it exists.
I think this is where tech can be a solution too. One of our customers just took 6 different factories through their CMMC certification, and we prepped their data really well for the C3PAO, and it was quite efficient. Like, it was weeks, not months, to get through the audit process. Yeah.
So innovation and automation. Yeah. That's good.
And one thing I really loved is that they kind of are categorizing the confidential, unclassified information better for us, or CUI, as we use the acronym. So we're looking at controlled technical information, critical infrastructure security information, and a couple of others. And that's going to drive that level too. And so now I think businesses can be like, okay, am I dealing with controlled infrastructure? Am I dealing with controlled technical information? And I love that the data drives the level of assessment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because it is ultimately the data that's the level of risk of information leakage, right? And defining the risk and why, and having the ability to tell the story of why there's risk that maybe you don't understand that you're part of is what's going to show up in the contract requirements.
Yeah. And then we got some clarity around level 3s. CUI involving breakthrough, unique, advanced technology, significant aggregation compilation of CUI, or a ubiquity where it's kind of like you're so interconnected as a vendor that your failure has a cascade effect out, or a network effect out. And those are going to require DBAC assessments. So that's the government doing an audit of you. Is that correct, Bob?
Yeah. So DBAC is DoD's teams coming out and assessing, and keep talking risk, right? That's DoD saying there's too much risk. You own too much of the risk that we're responsible for that are important for national defense. And we need to verify and then trust, and we need to have the ability to continuously do that. Yeah.
We've got one customer that has already been, I think they've gotten some information. They need to be prepared for a level 3 style assessment. Mm-hmm. We didn't think we'd see any. We thought it was pretty far out of our purview, but it happened quite quickly.
Yeah. I'm interested in, we don't need to too much detail your customer, but I'm interested. I got to assume that the ones who are going to be responsible for having to meet level 3 understand that that's the business they're in. And while they may not have been preparing for all aspects of understanding the specifics of the DFARS requirement, they had to understand that, and I hope they understand before CMMC that they had special obligations from a security perspective, from a protecting information perspective.
Oh, I mean, certainly this group is a very mature organization. I think they weren't sure, but man, you have to look at, they could never tell us what they were doing. Of course, that's how secretive it needs to be. But you'd have to imagine that the types of things that they were engaging around was so sensitive that it just required that level of authorization. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the system level complexity. So each information system that is handling FCI or CUI requires a CMMC unique identifier. I think this is another, as a CTO, like a technical difference in SPRS. So you're tracking and affirming that an information system that's handling that data, you can identify it, like it has an identifier, and this is what it is doing. How are you finding customers thinking about systems boundaries of information systems?
I mean, it goes back to sort of the ideas in zero trust and the ideas of trying to limit your blast radius associated with that. And, that's good security architecturing. And so it starts from a security architecture perspective for our customers there around that. And then saying, okay, things should only have access to the things, and they should only work to, it's limited to high risk things. And so designing the technical architecture behind that and be able to report that is kind of the conversations that I have with some of our customers.
Yeah. I've had systems I've designed in the past where we created like unique instances for each customer, like a physical separation instead of just a logical separation of data, because the data was so sensitive that we could. There was a cost to doing business in that way, right? Because we had to provision more technical infrastructure, but at least the segmentation and to your point, the blast radius was limited, because if we had a breach in one instance, it wouldn't infect the other instances necessarily.
It reduces likelihood of breach, of course, because not only is the blast radius limited, but the target radius is also hopefully limited. So you can't get in through.
Mm-hmm. For the FCI stuff, though, that gets really, in fact, federal contract information, because if you load it up in Salesforce, that's a very porous system. It's going to be in a lot of places.
You are accepting some risk. I won't say anything negative about Salesforce, but you are. I mean, obviously, companies rely a lot on software systems to manage data around that, and one of the things that we're competing against is years of using software to improve efficiencies and improve data availability and the ability to work virtually and the ability to share information and all that, which has all been wonderful for business effectiveness, but has created security vulnerabilities. And, sometimes we are trying to catch up with, we made a business effectiveness decision without taking into account the new security risks there. And, as somebody who advises companies and, working with different suppliers, you want to start at the outset of like thinking about where your suppliers are going to have access to things that are critical to your information and design the security in. So you're going to use Salesforce for one of its competitors, but how do you protect that from the purpose of not making sure it doesn't have anything that is CUI? Let's use it at FCI.
I talk a lot with our customers and potential customers about the fact that you really have both a right and a responsibility to design effective security, and that you can't take a compliance requirement like CMMC or any other framework as being the design of your security. That's a measurement tool. You're going to get assessed against it. Yeah, but you got to be an active participant in how you're going to organize this information in the systems that support it. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, as a security professional, you are aware of all the frameworks and tools that you could potentially be held accountable for, or in an ideal world you are, but you're still starting with what's the right level of security to manage risk to my risk tolerance, given the resources from my board. And hopefully that gets you to something that gets you to compliance relatively quickly. Don't start with the requirements, start with the security, and then, fill the gap to make sure that the security meets the requirement.
Yeah. Okay. So the DFARS ruling talks about what they term a phase one rollout, which I think is a little bit of a misnomer because it makes it seem like this is going to be slowly rolled out, but it doesn't quite feel that way. I do think this is like any new contract has to have a CMMC requirement in it. Is that right?
That's my expectation.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see level of pushback. We'll see if there's any, if it's too aggressive, but I think that's probably what they're going in there thinking about.
Mm-hmm. And it'll be in the solicitation. You'll know up front as a contractor what you got to meet. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't talked sort of the reality of the policy window or the political window here, but this will happen a year after President Trump was elected. So we're 1 year into the Trump administration, and this is a real opportunity to get this stuff all instantiated in the next year. And I think certainly the appointees over the Department of Defense or Department of War recognize that, and they're going to be pushing hard to make sure that this is completely instantiated through 2026.
Yeah. And you, of course, worked for the government for a long time and helped that risk office and supply chain office kind of design what they were working on. It feels to me, I get that we deal with new administrations from time to time, but this theme seems to have been going for DOD, DOW, through different administrations from different political parties.
I think there were inefficiencies in implementation because of political change, and maybe there always is with that. But the goal of what ultimately is going to get implemented in CMMC has been consistent. That the framework has been, there's been ups and downs, but has, I think, overarching from people who look at from the outside, I think there has been consistency there. There's just a real sense right now that it is going to be a major win for the Department of Defense to get it done. And I think they're going to lean on that as a major win.
Yeah. And of course, you've worked with Katie Arrington for some time, the CISO at the DoD. And so maybe, having known her as a leader and seeing her in this leadership role, I think you see that this is something that she and the administration broadly wants to continue to roll out and see implemented.
Yeah, I mean, the good news about Katie is if you see her on stage or if you talk to her, whether you know her very well or not, what you see is what you get. And it really is. And this is something that is a passion project to secure the country for Katie. And, this is something that was important to her last time around in the first Trump administration. And certainly in her time as the acting CIO, it's been very important to her. Personnel wise, the DoD will have a new CIO, presumably in the next couple months. Kirsten Davies has had her hearing and was appointed by President Trump. And so she will be taking over the job and will probably take the next step. So it'll be interesting to see what happens the next step with new leadership at the DoD CIO shop. But I know while Katie's there, this is something she's committed to get done.
Yeah. And I have to say that, I try to live up to the example that some of my colleagues that work inside the federal government, that certainly we're all voters, we participate in our democracy, but at the same time, we also kind of see that this is good for our nation, broadly. Even myself personally, like I would like to continue the public-private partnership that we do as a nation. And I'd like to see the level of security expectations raised, especially on the private side. Like I think it's useful. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's good for the nation because the service, right, we haven't talked about, but the companies that are going to have to go through CMMC are doing it because they decided to be in the business of supporting they are members of the defense industrial business. They made business decisions that I want to be part of helping the nation, helping the government defend the nation. Right. And I'm excited about that. And that's a special obligation. Like, we can talk about the special obligation on the government side, but the special obligation on the private sector side, that if you are doing something that is important to a community or important to national defense or national security, you are in the business of providing a special obligation. And, there are security expectations on you in doing that. And I so appreciate that the private sector steps up into this special obligations, but I hope they match that with the security.
And I personally have, I'll use my own experience as being a CTO. I worked a lot in the startup space. At first, I think the first thing I had to hit was like a OWASP server hardening set of requirements or my first penetration test that I ever had to go through to win a contract. And at first it's terrifying, but for those that haven't been through it yet, I have to say that on the backside of all that work, I felt a lot more confident about what I knew I should do.
Yeah.
And then also more confident in my team and our culture and what we were doing. I think these are good practices. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. And I don't want to be too cheerleading the government. I mean, some of this can be too much. Some of this can be compliance heavy. Some of this can be too much cost for a little risk. But I think over the last 10 years, those issues have been sort of worked through as it relates to CMMC. And, we talked before about sort of, it's hard to imagine 10 years ago that this is just where we are here. But the benefit of that is that's because there has been deliberative processes. There has been learning. There has been feedback along the way. And now we are implementing CMMC with more automated tools available, ability to scale against all that. And so, if this is a way to continue to take advantage of private sector's abilities to help, the defense mission, let's be happy that we continue to rely on innovators, and we just want to help the innovators get to the right level of security.
Yeah, I love that, Bob. Bob, I'm so grateful for getting to spend time with you today, and
enjoyed it. And,
yeah,
I feel like we'll probably have to check in every 6 months to see where we are along the journey. But
yeah,
always happy to.
We're thinking about those teammates for sure. Bob, have a great day. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jess.